Call to order the City of Beaumont Council Workshop on Thursday, March 15th, 2018 at 4 p.m., up 4:02 p.m. Call to order, please.
Councilmember Santos?
Here.
Councilmember White?
Here.
Councilmember Lara?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Martinez?
Here.
Mayor Carroll?
Here. Thank you. Public comment. Any one person may address the City Council on any matter not on this agenda. If you wish to speak, please fill out a public comment form provided at the back table and give it to the City Clerk. There is a 3-minute time limit on public comments. There will be no sharing or passing of time to another person. State law prohibits the Council from discussing or taking actions brought up by your comments. Do we have public comment?
I have no request to speak.
Thank you. Workshop items. Number 1, the fiscal year 2018-19 budget. Do we have public comment on agenda item 1?
I do not.
All right, thank you. With that, I will turn it over to our city manager.
Thank you. I appreciate council making time to come this afternoon. We do have some food if you want to take a break and feel a need to get refreshed. Although, budget discussion, I can't imagine anything more exciting than that. So to kind of put this into a little bit of context, we put a kind of what I've called a gateway budget together last year, which really was trying to bridge the situation that we were in over to a new budgetary platform. So now I've been working on trying to take that to the next step, to develop some core assumptions and to begin working on that multi-year modeling with the primary objective to make sure that we're achieving that sustainability factor that's there. Also to kind of try to begin to put some shape, if you will, to the overall resources that the city has to work with. And so what I'd like to do with y'all here this afternoon and maybe into the early morning hours would be to kind of drill through some of the trend analysis that we've put together and to kind of make sure that y'all are comfortable with the direction that we're headed. This is a modeling effort. This is something that is going to be done every year. So we continue to update it. We continue to look at it. So our crystal ball, once we get past really 6 months, is we're not as clairvoyant, I guess, as we'd like to be a lot of times, but we're trying to work through. One thing I will say, when you look at the cover page of your PowerPoint presentation, I realize it is 2018. It's not 2017, so that is my bad. So I can tell on the first page I may not be off to the best start, so I do. My math is better than this. Yes. With that, also I'll orient you to your packet a little bit here. So obviously PowerPoint presentation, and so what I'd like to do is walk through the PowerPoint kind of fairly quickly. It's not long, but just wanted to kind of give you kind of a rough idea about some of the overall trends and some of the analysis that we've looked at to date, which is kind of the springboard to move forward into the next standard. Then there's a little packet here, and the top of it is a property tax allocation projection. So this shows you a historical HDL projection, and it also gives you an idea about what the growth rate within the context of the overall property tax levy had been. And then there's some analytical data behind that I'll walk through once we get to that point. There's a rainbow chart, I call it that, which is giving you an idea with regard to the revenue forecasting when it comes to our property tax and to our sales tax. And then, I don't have it in my packet, there's another chart that's got some population forecast information in it that was before that spreadsheet. And then the final information will walk you through this. So we've got a fairly detailed revenue projection going into next year. and spent a lot of time trying to hammer through the specific details. And I'll highlight for you some of the issues, but some of this information is still generalized, and we'll be breaking that out as we get deeper into the budget process. So, and then this set of spreadsheets is it shows you basically where we are with the departmental submissions in the general fund to this point. So please know that this is a very rough number at this point. So there's a lot of drill down. There's a lot of additional work that we need to do. So with that, are y'all comfortable with that game plan?
I have a question. When you do the presentation, do you want us to hold questions to the end, or if we have questions while you're on it, do you want us to go ahead and ask them then?
We can stop. So I'd rather carefully go through and answer
Okay,
any
fine.
questions you may have.
I think probably we're the most comfortable with that. And because it's a workshop, just less formally, if you've got questions, just speak up and ask your questions, and we'll only turn on the shot clock if we're disobedient and spread around too much on our time. So that's all. All right?
I think the shot clock's going to get worn out. Okay. Sure. Okay, so welcome to the 2019 budget workshop being held in 2018, not 2017. So we actually held our first workshop, I think, I looked at our calendar in May of last year, so we're actually a little bit ahead of schedule. So, these are the 6 council goals that were established. We went through a pretty comprehensive discussion on goals and objectives. So as we're looking at our budget, we're trying to make sure that we're reflecting these 6 statements that are there. So I was going to see if council wanted to get a chance to kind of walk through these and see if there's any updates or changes if you think these are still valid. So for folks that may be tuning in, I'm sure there's a lot of them, the 6 goals are along the lines of public safety, quality of life, economic development, community services, sustainable community, and intergovernmental interagency relationships. And these were created through a series of brainstorming sessions and open input sessions that the City Council had through a series of workshops.
From last year, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Do we have any questions on the goals?
Good.
Go ahead.
Santos, you good? Okay. Okay, so here's a rough projection of general fund rolling forward from 2015 through what the projected looks like through 2019. And if you look, you'll see 2019 right now shows a negative of $2.8 million. Again, this is a very rough initial draft that gives us a rough idea as to the starting point. We'll go through a significant amount of drill down as well as an additional amount of scoping work as we get through the departmental budgets. So one of the things we'll be looking at is really developing this off of a zero-based budget concept where we'll start every line item from zero. So we're just at the beginning of that process to really begin working through all those. But this gives you a rough idea. That number, again, reflects maintenance of current levels of effort. There's not a lot of programming. There's no additional personnel included within that number. So one of the things that we've been working hard to do is to try to take care of those designated reserves. So we have that target of 15% on the general fund. And we'd already populated the 1.5 million that we needed for the capital reserve fund. You can see that for the current budget of 17-18, that we are a balanced budget. And then 2019 would be a balanced budget as well. So we don't necessarily reflect that there's additional adds coming into the reserve fund at this time on the 17-18, since we're still in the current fiscal year. 2017 audit's underway. So these are just based on the end-of-year numbers that were provided through our accounting software. So we'll see what that number actually turns out to be. But you can see for 16-17, we had those one-time revenues that we've realized of $8 million.
Just a comment. So the capital reserve that we're shooting for is $2 million.
Yes, sir.
I think that'd be helpful if, I don't know if you've done it in the other documents, that's next to the word capital reserve. Because and so that leads to my next question. If you take the 250 that you are applying to the capital reserves or budgeting, and that explains why there's a reserve deficit of 1.75. I'm trying to make that same connection on 2017 with the other reserves, and it's not as clear to me how you're getting to those numbers. I understand the insurance reserve is what we're shooting for, 1.5 million, and then the other one we're shooting for 11. How are you figuring out the general fund reserve?
What we're looking at here is the designated unobligated reserve, the percent of general fund expenditures, and the designated to the insurance reserve and the capital reserve, okay? So those are ongoing balances. So
Okay.
the reserve deficits, show you what the additional targeted amount would be to hit our desired level of reserve fund.
And what is that?
So, for example, to try to be at our 15% at the end of 2017, we would need to add another 989, basically another $1 million. So that reserve would need to be brought up to about 4.1, 4.2 million.
So the 11.5 represents the percentage of
Operating.
of what the reserves are to the general fund?
Correct. Correct. To the operating expenses portion of the general fund.
Okay.
So we want to be at 15%
Of the operating
of the recurring
expenses?
expenditures. Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Not revenue expenses, okay.
Correct. Correct. And so typically, what we want to do over time is, if we are handling our projections correctly, our revenues should come in a little bit better than what we forecast. Our expenditures are right at or a little bit below what we forecast is the cycle we want to get onto, so that you have a little bit of additional dollars that continue to help you add up over a period of time.
So the general fund unobligated reserve, just for clarification, is not saying that we're 989,000 in the hole. We're 989,000 off of what our target.
Correct.
And so we're getting lower and lower because the percentage of our unobligated reserve is getting smaller and smaller, correct?
Correct. So we're budgeting balanced budgets, and as your expenditures grow, then the requirement, that 15% as a ratio increases. So you need to try to increase that year to year.
Okay.
Ideally you would be able to accomplish that through conservative budgeting and financial practices.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so on the general fund, again, we're talking about general fund this evening, because that's really the fund that for which a lot of work has been required initially. So if you look at the overall sources for the general fund for 2018, 50% of that came from taxes. And so that's a combination of your franchise fees, it's a combination of sales tax, it's a combination of your various property taxes. You've got your half-cent taxes for public safety, your street lighting taxes. All those are rolled up into that number there. Your permits are all the various permits that you issue, building permits, planning permits, anything is along those lines. Charges for service are everything associated with where we charge a fee for park usage, for traffic tickets, all those things roll up into the charges. So 23% of your budget for this fiscal year came from charges. And 16% is transfers. So those are CFD dollars, those are other intergovernmental transfers that may come over into the general fund.
There's no CFD dollars in the taxes section.
Correct. That's correct. That's correct. So if you look at the forecast we have for the general fund for 2019, what you'll see is an increase, a slight increase on the portion of the revenues that are coming from taxes. And I'll describe that a little bit later, but that's grown to about 52%. You've got a little less of a reliance on charges for service. And the other numbers remain relatively stable or steady. So one of the most critical elements to staff as we've been looking and working through forecasting for the general fund. Again, one of the critical issues is how susceptible Beaumont's financial picture can be to significant changes in the economy, and particularly when you look at the state tax limits in terms of property tax limits. That has an impact. And so you can see what happened to the city over time from 2008 through the current budget, 2017, where we hit the major economic recession. And with, again, state statute, how that pushed the valuation of residential properties down based on market value. And we kind of leveled out at 2012 and then kind of moved back up and are just now to a point of kind of getting a little bit ahead on that curve. If you're watching the news, it doesn't matter what flavor of news you're watching or reading, pretty much everybody is agreeing that we have another economic correction, I guess you could say, that's coming. I'm reading more and more these days that's talking about the fact that that recession could be very comparable to what we saw in 2008 and 2009. So we have a pretty significant downfall that could be coming, correction that could be coming our way. And so that's, I guess, why I've been talking, and as council we've been talking a lot about trying to get a multi-year picture. Don't make decisions year to year in anticipation of or without understanding what the greater economic impact could be on into the out years. So you look at that number, you say, okay, what does that mean to us? So went back to look at our HDL reports to see what we were, what was happening on the overall secured property tax valuation, and which is reflected in the revenues that you see. So the orange portion of the bar is your residential properties. The blue is commercial. So I thought y'all like orange and blue. It's a pretty good color combo. Blue and silver didn't, or black and silver didn't work very well. So yellow is your industrial, and then red is your vacant. So you can see that you really saw a little bit of fluctuation on the non-residential property revenues that were generated through property taxes, but your residential had significant swings. So, again, to begin to break that down a little bit further.
Touch that due to foreclosures and changing over.
The primary reason is that you saw a significant, this shows you. if you look at the levy that was coming in per parcel during this time period, 2008 to 2017, what you saw was that your residential property valuation, or I'm sorry, your tax levy per residential parcel dropped significantly. It really doesn't show up as much on here, but you went from, and you can see it on this sheet right here. But if you look at 2008, your secured property tax revenue per residential parcel was at $2.17 or $217.19. That's what an average parcel paid to the city in general property tax in 2008. If you look at 2012, where it bellies out, it was down to $145.18. And that's due to the fact that the tax value, the market or appraised value of that property goes down as the market values go down for residential properties. It doesn't affect the non-residential parcels, but it really, really affects you. And when you look at the fact that about 80% from 2004 to today, about 80% of your AV on the tax roll is single-family residential. And that number has remained relatively consistent. So it dropped to about 77% of your AV at the very low of the market, 2012. So but you've maintained in that 81 to 77% range consistently all these years. So even with some of the commercial development you've had, the conversion of residential to of vacant to residential is carrying your value. And if you look at that chart, you'll see that. You'll see that the vacant valuation was at about 11% or so in 2008, and it's down to about 5-6% in terms of your overall value today. So it's about half. So you've consumed about half of that vacant over just this last 10-year cycle, which I'm sure isn't surprising. I know I'm kind of belaboring the obvious, but I think looking at the data and putting kind of the data to the perspective is somewhat helpful. So here's what your percent change in levy looked like. So from 2008 to 2009, you lost 13% of your overall assessed value. And again, when you think about your taxes are generating about 50%, and your property tax is generating about probably about a fourth or about a third of your total property tax or your tax levy, it has a significant effect of several $100,000 on you. So you're at minus 6%, so you continue to downward spiral. You're at 3% in 2011, and you finally stop losing value in 2012. You gained 5% in 13. You gained about 18% in 14. You're at 10% in 15, and you've been holding in between 5 and 6% for 16 and 17. The new AV rolls that HDL had forecast for next year is up about 8% because you've added new value through development over the last year. So from 17 into 18, you've got new value. So on the general fund, here's some of the core considerations that we're working through, and these are rolled into the numbers that you see right now. And was really looking to get some discussion from council and some direction on some of this, really all of it. But again, looking at that revenue model, looking at that trend that we saw in that tax base from 2008 to 2017. I wish we could go back further. We've pulled as much data as we can out of HDL. We just don't have a lot of historical data that is in a reliable format to try to go back. I've scanned through financial statements through prior budgets and what I can get my hands on, and I couldn't get a lot of it to make sense, which probably isn't surprising.
It's because they're forged. I started saying we
So-
can give it to you, but you're wasting your time.
Okay, so, again, what I'm thinking about is the trends, and we'll kind of walk through a little bit more detail if you want to on some of this with some of the detailed sheets here. Some of the key projects that we've got programmed right now that is reflected in the $37 million general fund budget is an overall economic development strategic plan. And again, that would be a project that you would go out to RFP and you'd have a contract for, a full-blown plan, which would do market analysis. You've got a little bit of work that is being done through the general plan update, but that's going to really look more at what your land use mix is in the plan. It's not going to really look at an economic development strategic plan for the city. So this is doing analysis, looking at what your target markets would be, developing target market strategies, and developing some implementation to put that into effect. We have had the overall communication strategy that we had adopted. There was an additional recommendation in the plan that we would go out next year to, again, bring in a consultant to help us develop an overall communications plan for the city. Based on some other pricing we'd looked at, and some of the consultants we've talked to out there, it's about $25,000 to outsource that. Looking at creating the city's website and developing a phone app, we've been looking through several companies, and we've got a quote in to do an updated website, which is about $7,000 for next year. It's Civic Plus, who's the current website provider that we use. They've got some updated services that they can now deliver. That included a website redesign and reconstruction for next year, and it would include a free update after the third year. So when we got into year 4, so we'd have this cost. We've been spending about $4,500 a year in service and maintenance fees. It would go back to about that same range after this year if we did this. And then also develop a cell phone app through Civic Plus. That would be about a $4,000 cost. And there'd be about an $1,800 a year fee associated with that. They would provide an update to that as well. So that's about $11,000. And paramedic squad, we've been talking with CAL FIRE. What that is, that's adding an additional squad over at the central station to add for a depth of service call coverage. So they would respond to the lower order calls. Right now, your engine companies are going out on medical related calls. They're cross-trained as paramedics. They're needed to provide for major accidents, for heart attacks, strokes, those kinds of things. But what happens is they're being called out on multiple calls, and they may not make it back into the station at the time that another call comes in. So they complete that call and then try to get back and then get sent to the next one. So I've got some data that I'm starting to pour through that is starting to give us some annual comparison of what the call loads look like, and then what the average time per call is starting to look like. So what you'll see is that there's a slight uptick in overall call volume, but what we saw from 16 to 17 was a little bit of a concerning increase in the time per call. That's kind of seems like it's leveled out here, as we're getting into 17 into 18, but it's just kind of one of those issues. It's just a matter of time as we see more and more development. We've got included in the capital plan to be out to the design on the West Side Fire Station. You've got some land set aside for you off Potrero for that station, and we've got dollars budgeted for station construction. So you've got about $3.1 million or so we're contemplating for station construction.
Todd,
Yes.
some of the data that I looked up from CAL FIRE was indicating that basically 90% of their calls are medical.
That's right.
And so, are they willing to look at maybe giving up or reducing the number of trucks that we have to pick up the paramedic squad?
No, this is another layering, this is another add. But the other aspect is that this is the first step in developing your engine company, that third engine company in the city. And so to go in price from paramedic squad about 1.3 to an engine company would be about another $200,000-300,000. So you're nearly there on your staffing level. You'd have some additional cost for the purchase of a new engine for the new station. So this gets you significantly there towards staffing your next fire station if that happens. And as Chief Smith had explained it to me, this is adding depth to the service. So meaning that you've got additional resources there to roll when that call comes in, considering that you may have your engines further afield or out to more calls. But, you know, their call load between 85 to 90% medical calls is very common in the fire industry. That's the lion's share of what fire service does, and teaming up with ambulance service to address those needs.
Do you know what our staffing cost is now?
Staffing cost now is about 2.9 million. So this would take you to about 4.1, 4.2 million. If you do it. So on this issue, one of the steps that we would need to take in working with CAL FIRE to try to start to implement or roll this out would be to enter into an MOU, a letter of agreement or understanding with CAL FIRE. That then is a signal for them to begin the process to try to hire and to get their staffing put together to provide delivery. So in our conversation with them, we've been talking about the possibility of having it stood up as of July 1. The question and the direction I've given back to them is, definitely would be interested in doing it if we can. I don't think we're in a position to commit yet until we get a chance to kind of hammer through and do more details. So you may look at it mid-year, or this may be something that comes into play year after, and so into the 2019-2020 fiscal year. So, but we're trying to get this forward as quickly as we can to get you guys. We have been working on an MOU, and I think we've got some language finalized on that. So we're ready to bring it to you whenever you guys are ready to look at that.
Are you calculating the paramedic squad in these numbers going forward? So you've already built that in?
Yeah. So that's already built into that 37 that you see there.
Okay.
So that's already there. And, we're continuing our efforts on our street program. We did our street assessment. We're working on a specific detail with regard to the streets and scheduling that we would do. If you recall, that street assessment indicated that we had an overall score of about 70, 71 on the system, but we have a lot of newer street inventory that really averages the condition index out over the entire city. And not surprisingly, what you saw were significantly degraded or failed roadway sections here in the central part of the city. So our capital planning anticipates putting several, it's about $9 million or so of repair and replacement to those street sections within the central part of the city over the next 5 years. That is based upon SB 1 dollars being here, and is based upon the Measure A dollars that you've got coming in now through the TUMF program. So Measure A represents about a $900,000 sales tax revenue to you next year. We're in year 1 this year, so we had programmed about $433,000 or $488,000 in revenue through the Measure A program this year. What the CIP does and how it schedules these road improvements is it contemplates SB1 being the primary dollars that go towards the physical improvements, and those dollars get funded only after they've been realized. So once we've booked the sales tax for the year prior from the SB1 program, then we go to deploy those dollars. So we know exactly what you have, and you're able to scope your contracts and your RFPs to the scope of work that you reasonably can accomplish with those dollars. And you can, council will have an opportunity then to prioritize how you want to apply those. Yeah, so we'll look at that. What dollars do you have? Here's the worst areas we want to try to get to first. Now, some of it may be counterintuitive. You know, there may be failed sections that we say don't reconstruct those yet. Take care of the other sections first. You stretch your street maintenance dollar out by prevention and keeping roads from going to a fail status. If you go and you begin to reconstruct and fix all the failed as your first priority, you're going to eat up all your dollars right away. You're going to have very little reconstruction relative to the amount of maintenance you could otherwise accomplish, and you're going to lose a larger amount of your road section faster. So that's a balance of the program that we'll be looking at when we present it back to you. So the Measure A dollars and our gas tax dollars are what we're trying to program and use as the restricted funds for your street operations program. So your staffing, equipment, you know, using those dollars for those recurring expenses through that section. And again, those dollars are restricted. That's what those dollars are really intended for. So we want to book those and apply those and be able to report back that this is how we're putting those together. So as we drill down deeper into our budget, we'll be making that, you know, we'll make sure that those are lining out correctly and they're handling. So again, restricted funds, making sure they go into the right places and making sure that we're budgeting and reporting those back out as they should be. So code enforcement, we had budgeted a position this year. We've been through a recruitment process since the beginning of the year, and we've just not been successful in hiring a code enforcement, or I guess a community enhancement. Really, that's what we changed the title to community enhancement. But again, we're continuing those efforts. We are looking at some alternatives to come back to council on as we get into the budget to maybe restructure existing staff to see if there's a way to begin to address that. We've got some good staff currently with the city that has already got background and certifications in doing this kind of work. So we have some ideas for that. But it would adjust some of the other service levels that we're providing. And we're working on things, vision for the future. So downtown enhancements, we're working on our plaza concept, our streetscape concepts. We'll be coming to you with an additional contract amendment that looks at a traffic study for 6th Street, looks at traffic management on 6th Street, with the primary objective of trying to make it a more pedestrian-friendly area, and also make it more suitable for retail and successful retail business. So, we've heard from retailers and the business owners downtown that it is a struggle because of high speeds of traffic and really the unsafe feeling you get trying to walk around that area. Particularly as you try to cross, you have to walk significant ways to be able to cross safely at intersections at traffic lights. So looking at that. Parks and Recreation, there's needs we've identified in our CIP. We've looked at trying to fund some specific plans, trail plans, those types of things, as well as some other overall park plans for the city. We do know that our rec center and our soccer/baseball complex is beyond capacity. We have some other parks facilities that are out there that we can probably invest some dollars into, so we need to look at those things. Municipal facilities, we had been looking at doing some things with this building, some renovations, some other work to create some more office space. In terms of meeting space and office space in this building, we're maxed out, so there's some additional things that we need to do for operations there. And we're looking at that. we've been looking at some pricing and some scoping on doing some of those other alterations to this building. Again, don't know if there's any other continuing efforts that are out there. One other enhancement, and Mayor and I were talking about this, I've been talking about this for a while. I don't know how long exactly, but the idea that do we want to look at an internal auditor, to bring into the staff, and to do it right, that's not a position that should report to the city manager. That's somebody that has to be outside of me or any city staff. It needs to be somebody who reports to council or to some other individual or group outside of me. One of the things that I think is needed is to find a way to develop some sort of effort to create a fraud hotline or some sort of fraud program. There's things that you can do to set up hotlines. There's a cost associated with that, but it is a pretty critical function to look at, so people can call and go outside the organization.
Ms. Yuramovic, could you please show a little more level of maturity and allow us to do our business up here?
Oh, am I disrupting you?
You are. We gave you an opportunity during public comments to speak.
I'm not talking.
You're distracting.
Am I distracting you by sitting here?
So your answer is no.
I'm just sitting here.
Okay.
Don't look at me if it's distracting to you, Lloyd White. How many people are in the room? Oh, 10. 4 people. Well, wait, without being staff, 1, 2, Julie Farron? We're distracting you, the public?
No, just
Okay.
you are.
Just
Enough.
me.
It's enough.
So Todd, would that be an idea of, in addition to an external auditor that we hire? Or are you still thinking of that, a dual process, or?
It
how does that-
need a dual process. So, it's somebody that would be able to work with our treasurer, somebody who, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a full-time position, it'd be a part-time kind of position. But again, somebody that would report directly to council is what I had kind of envisioned. They can look, they free reign, to look through anything that we have, any questions that they have. They're there to answer any questions that's there. You still need your independent auditor to come and do your year-end financial review and to develop your audits, your end-of-year audits. Ultimately, we need to get to a CAFR, and that makes finance people here cringe when I say that, because I would love to see us get a CAFR next year. But maybe in a couple years we can realistically get a CAFR completed, which is a lot more detailed financial report. It's got a lot of additional background information in it than what your current financial reports have. But so you still need to get that independent audit done. That's still mandated. It still needs to happen. But it's really somebody that's there to be an extra set of eyes that's looking over our financials on an ongoing basis. Just a thought. One of the other continuing efforts, we are finishing up the RFP process also for lobbyist services. So we'll be presenting that to you probably in May. A proposal for that. So we've got about $48,000 budgeted already for lobbyist services. It will be at the state primarily with some potential access to DC.
2 questions. So the potential for this other position has or has not been put into any of the figures going forward. And the same question would apply to the lobbyist services. Are they in there?
Lobbyist services are accounted for. Any additional staffing for any other departments are not accounted for.
That's
So this is current staffing with the few of these add-on things that were provided really through prior direction from council as we looked at some of the other things. With the exception of the paramedic squad, that is something that I've been talking to CAL FIRE about. we've touched on very lightly, I think, in the past. So outside of that, I think all these other things are fairly consistent with some of the discussions we've had in the past.
Can I have a quick question? On the, that's a good idea, I mean, on the internal auditor. The thing on that, for sure, you're gonna give us all the job description and that and everything. And who will be responsible on this person, I mean, or reporting to
I think, I mean,
directly?
you know, we have to walk through, but I think they would
Yeah.
reply or respond directly to the council.
Okay.
And presumably, they'd probably have direct contact with the mayor, is probably who they would really deal with on a day-to-day basis. But ultimately, it's like the city attorney, you know, other folks, they
Yeah.
would work directly for the council.
Okay, that's good.
I have a question about the paramedic squad. When we were looking into manning the fire station a while ago, one of the things that I did was to go around and look at what some other cities are doing, because everybody is hit with the impact of this cost. And I did find reinforcement for what you said about how 90% of the calls are really medical runs, which are critical also in timed response. But one of the things that some of the cities were doing were to, when there is insurance coverage for a medical response, they were billing not a sort of market value amount, but a small amount, and then the people would be able to get reimbursed for it. Or they would be able to bill directly to the insurance companies in some instances. In other words, I guess if a response was at market rate was $500, they had a set fee of $200 that was extraordinarily reasonable in terms of an allowable charge. And they were allowing either the cities to bill directly, or they were billing the citizen only when they had coverage for it. They were never taking it beyond anything that was covered. Is that something that any of the potential for discussions in the contract would allow, or is that something that's out of possibility for us?
I think everything's on the table at this point. So we'll introduce that concept to CAL FIRE, and say, hey, we'd like to look at that possibility for recapture.
Okay.
That cost. Gotcha. Yeah, Mr. Patterson was just saying that they've developed ordinance for their cities like that for a cost recovery fee that they've applied to EMS, public safety.
That's correct, yeah, where the insurance company can be billed for the cost of the response. It's been a while since I've done one, but that's the general concept, and other jurisdictions do this as well.
And it's just written off. Anything that is not paid, gets written off, but it's never an amount that is beyond what an insurance company would charge.
Yeah, I think that's the purpose, and there are private businesses out there that administer these programs. They're kind of like agencies that go out and recover this and go through the paperwork and the claims process with the insurance companies. It's been a while since I've done one, but they do
Okay.
exist.
It's just, thank you, just keep it in mind, I guess.
And I just wanted to make sure that this is looking at current levels of service with some of the additional direction that we've been working on. So there is no additional staffing changes in terms of new positions included within the budget. So there's some assumptions that we've made with regard to making changes to compensation for several of our bargaining units. But since we are in negotiations, really not liberty to go into discussions on what those are, but we've provided some consideration, for those as well. So just want to make sure that that's incorporated as we are looking strategically at our budget. So moving into future budgets. So really, and I guess I've kind of beat this to death, but this is really kind of the ground floor for the budgetary process that we'd like to build, and it'll improve as we go through the years and implement this section. And as we get better and a longer range of information to kind of help hone our projections a little bit. But where we're trying to go is, again, on the multi-year sustainability model. And again, I'm giving you a preview of some of the core pieces that we've been working on to build towards that model, which is why it's kind of very important to kind of see what y'all think tonight. But again, looking at those revenue projections, at least 5 years, but what I've been working on is actually developing revenue projections for property tax and sales tax that go out beyond 10 years. And it helps us also look at what our spending targets are. And particularly in California, your property taxes your rates are pretty much set. So the factors that influence that are going to be the various growth dynamics that are happening out there. But those spending targets help us understand what it takes to maintain current levels of service. And then it gives us a frame of reference to identify what needs to happen or what resources do you need to make available to add additional things that you want to do. For example, there's been a policy established for level of police service. What is it really going to take to really do that? How feasible is that going to be? So this gives you an ability to really look at that. With regard to our bargaining units, it'd be nice, to be able to say, hey, here is a model, here is where we think the city is overall, and instead of getting into a discussion every other year, we can have an ongoing dialogue, with all of our units and say, hey, this is where we're going over time, and so, what are the things that we can look at? So we have a good open conversation, in this process, so we're there, and we know the resources that we have to work with. There's a chart that I developed in the past, I called the spaghetti graph, because it had a few lines on it, but I kind of envision the same thing here, where we're mapping out what your resources are over 10 years. What is going to be required to maintain your current levels of service over that same 10-year period? What is the additional cost projected to be over that period for the types of programs that council may want to contemplate over a period of time? And then, we're budgeting, we're hitting those targets, we're now aligning our programming with the resources you're actually going to have. And then you can begin to establish a policy that, should you have additional revenues that build up over time, that we should be able to realize that we have policies on how to utilize those funds. So you're not taxing your citizen and not returning the dollars back to them in terms of services, because you're going to be required to collect levy. And so it needs to be used correctly. And then finally is fully integrating a community investment plan. So we're starting the basis of that with your 5-year CIP that's been done. We have finished out the meetings with the citizen committee that was there. So we're developing a report, but that begins the process in terms of that's the entree into a full-blown, a real CIP. And then, again, that'll be integrated and rolled back over time. One of the key issues that we really need to look at is capital replacement and repair. So fortunately, with your fire contract, one of the good things with the CAL FIRE contract is that you've already got dollars that are going in for equipment replacement. So you've got reserves, you've got dollars that are there. So, that helps you over time have dollars available to replace that engine, do those types of things. So we need to look at the same thing for motor graders, for any of those other kinds of major pieces of equipment that you've got. And we've been acquiring some more heavy pieces that are going to have to be planned for over time. And then, ultimately a capital acquisition plan. So if there's land you need to buy, if there's other buildings to acquire, we need to develop a plan that begins to contemplate those needs as well over time. So what do we do next after tonight? I'll be submitting to you here no later than May a fully balanced budget. And it'll have various programming or non-programming. One of the things that you'll see with that budget submission would be what the departments were proposing and what I didn't include. And you'll be able to hear from the departments, hey, I had proposed this, here's why, so they'll be able to talk to you about that and explain. The other thing is to, again, fully fleshing out the fiscal model. Again, that won't be just the general fund, it'll be the wastewater fund, our major funds. It'll include the CFD program as well. So another major piece of work really is drilling down and providing, again, detailed information for the CFD program. What dollars came in? How were they used? How are you planning to use those? We've been working with Webb and Associates to help develop a 5-year cash model also in terms of what CFDs could be generated over a 5-year period. And that's important because we now have got the CFD for public safety services, as well as the ongoing potential growth for the other CFD dollars that are being created for future facility, as well as for ongoing maintenance. And so when we look at our street program, being able to identify roadway sections within the subdivisions from which those CFD funds come from to say, hey, they're going in to maintain this. Again, we're working with Webb to drill down and start to pull that information together. So with everything else we have to do, there's still a lot of major detail work to do to kind of get our budget skeleton put together. So we'll have a generalized CFD program included is what I envision, and then as we get into next year, as we move forward, we'll drill down and we'll begin to parse that out in finer detail. But at least with the objective of this year, say, hey, generally this is where these dollars came in, and then here's how they were deployed. I'd worked up a rough model for this that I had discussed with the HOA at Sundance, and showed them generally the approach to how we would apply dollars within their subdivision, and then how we were applying those dollars, on the city as a whole, for things like Parks and Rec and for other maintenance and operations. But that is a very critical question that a lot of cities really are, or citizens are, say 2017, and I can't get citizen right either. I apologize. So that is your overview. So I don't know if y'all have any questions or concerns or anything at this point. You want a break before we get into a deep dive?
Yeah, I would like to. Everyone else is good.
I'm sorry, you want a break or a question? A break? Okay. Let's break till 10 after 5. Thank you.